In this video, I'm going to show you a quick way to break down what you're seeing for description, as well as an example of how to improve your description. So here we have a picture of a student work, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw right on top of it. First, I'm going to open this in Photoshop. I'm going to create a new layer. This is a blank layer, so it looks like a little post-it note flipping up here. And then I'm going to use my paintbrush. And I'm going to make sure that my paintbrush is black so that I can actually see it. And I can change the size of my paintbrush, the shape of it. I have kind of a crazy paintbrush going right now, so I'm fixing to have a more normal one. And what I want you to do is pick, I said between 7 and 8 lines, and 7 and 8, or 7 to 8 details of line, 7 to 8 details of shape. So I would just start outlining important shapes that you see. Start with things that are the largest, of course. So here I'm going to trace over this wall, and I'm going to continue to. I don't have a pad here. I'm just kind of doing it with my mouse, so bear with me. So go ahead and find a way to draw right on your picture for any of the major lines or shapes. Okay? I've continued to draw here. If you make a mistake, you can click on your eraser tool and erase some of the lines that mistakes you've created, so on and so forth. And then clicking back on your brush and drawing your lines. So I've drawn a whole bunch of stuff on here. Now we're going to actually take a look to see what this actually looks like, to hopefully break this down a little bit more for you. So if you look in your layers box, we have my layer 1 where I've added a bunch of lines, and we have our background image. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on the eye on my background image, and voila. There are some of the things. Obviously my lines are not quite exactly perfect, but what it does is it starts to break down some of the important shapes that are there. So things that we might call a rectangle maybe look more like a square, or things we would have said are a square are more rectangle. We can also start to see, for example, this is a big part of that wall. But when I look at just that shape, I can see that it creates almost a triangle that divides my composition almost in half, like a rectangle here. If my picture were my picture is a rectangle, and we have this triangle that begins to almost cut it a little bit more than in half, and filling that bottom right major corner of that. So I would say that's almost covering 60% of that image, this rectangular or triangular like shape. So I would probably start describing that, since it takes up so much of the composition. And then I might move my eye over to these other smaller squares or rectangles that are created by this doorway. And then I would start to see where lines are dominating. Like I feel, for example, so many of these lines are repeated on this top left-hand part. Now we're saying it's on the ceiling because we know, but if I were to, draw these lines and then look at them as composition, they're on the top left-hand part of my image, the top left-hand part. And if I recall, they were kind of repeating over in this area. They were occurring over and over again in this area. So then I would start to talk about how they, maybe are smaller on this mid to top left part of my image. And as they move to the top of the frame, they get bigger. Top and right of the frame, they get bigger. The lines get bigger. Or we can talk about these square-like shapes, how they appear smaller here but as we move out more towards the top right, they get larger. So what does all this mean for our description? Well, instead of saying something such as there is a wall on an angle and there are lines on the ceiling, we could change that to say to this. So we're almost completely at 6 details for each of these. And what's important here is I did put quite a bit of information in each of these because I wanted to fully describe them. So for this first one, I'm saying the image is divided more than half diagonally with a large triangle shape. I continue on with that shape takes up about 60% of the frame. And then I talked about how I divided this side into another rectangle, just for an ease of describing it. And then I started to talk about this rectangle shape and how this almost creates another triangular shape. We know it's a rectangle because we know it's, we're there, we see it, we understand these doorways and hallways and things, but you have to go by what you can see, and this is cropped off. So I'm adding the 5, so to give more detail, because this was a shape, but then I started to break down the lines on that shape. So this big rectangle, now there are 5, okay, I mean, if we're talking thousands of things you don't want to count, I get it, but you can't tell me you can't count these lines. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I see 5 of them. So I see these 5 lines that are perpendicular to this line here, which is the bottom of this, because they would converge with that. And then I say that those lines are met with shorter lines in between. Now I could say how many short lines I see because I think that I could count those. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and so on. Maybe we see a 9th one here. But you can talk about how you see those, and that would even give you more details in line here. The smaller triangular shape has many details of lines that converge toward the rectangle shape. So I'm talking about how this area is more complex, and these lines all converge, meaning coming together towards these rectangular shapes. And then I talk about how the rectangles are outlined by dark lines. Okay. There's a thick white line, so I'm talking about this pipe here, a thick white line that starts just right of the middle top of the frame and moves diagonally, I could say diagonally down, I should have said, to just stopping at the top of the large rectangle. So you can go on and on and on. I mean, you can go beyond these if you get as detailed as this. Now, obviously, I've been teaching art for a while and I have some more vocabulary words under my belt. But just kind of envision you're describing it to someone who can't see it, and make sure that you're putting more meat into your details here about your shape and about line.